Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to High Top Sports Oregon. I am Cody the Professor, and today we have a special video. We're going to go over what Oregon has to do to win the Big Ten, possibly, what they're going up against, and we're going to go ahead and bring Derek the Duck on. How you doing, Derek?
Good, man. I love the Duck moniker. It's great. And Derek the Duck, it's my new favorite thing. I'm digging it. But yeah, man, always good. Glad to be shooting the show. Can't wait to get into it here a little bit. Talk some Oregon Duck offense. I know people have been very curious about what we're going up against and how we're stacking up. So I'm excited to dig into it for the people tonight.
So we are going to put a trigger warning out there, right? A lot of Ohio State comparison. Why we did that is because we think that Michigan is probably going to take a step back. Ohio State is going to take a step forward with what we are looking at, with what they have coming in and what they still have on the roster. Ryan Day is kind of in a prove it year. I would say the seat is not hot, but it's definitely warm for Ryan Day. And so let's go ahead and check that out. Let's get this going. And we got the Ducks versus the Big Ten.
Absolutely,
So,
man. We got to make a big splash year one. The people are not going to be happy if we come in and we're mediocre. Top five finish is not acceptable. We got to do what we got to do, man. We got some tall competition.
so what is before we get into the actual position groups? What is the one thing that you think that the Ducks obviously have going into the Big Ten, something they can capitalize on? And then what is one thing that you are concerned about or worried about that they are going to face in the Big Ten that they didn't face in the Pac-12?
Yeah, sure. So I think the one thing that we really have going for us, and this year's team specifically compared to years previously, is the sheer depth. I know tonight we're going to be covering the offense and kind of how that stacks up in accordance to the Big Ten. But just across the board, on the defensive side of the ball, I know we touched on that in one of our previous shows that, this is arguably one of the deepest Oregon teams I've seen in my lifetime. Um, if you really look at the depth chart and go to the three deep, we have guys sitting at our threes right now who could compete for starting spots, which is something I've never really seen in my lifetime to this point. So I would say depth is definitely a strength for the Ducks. Year one, obviously, this is going to be something we need to compete all year long. We're heading into the 12-team playoff this year, and we have potential to have more games than ever this year. So that depth is going to be something that's going to need to be tested throughout the year. Something that we're going to need to take advantage of at times. As we know, injuries happen. Subpar play happens from people you don't expect. Other people are going to show out that we weren't really expecting. But I think the depth is absolutely the thing that we have going for us this year. And we'll absolutely touch on that here in a minute. The thing that, we are going to be looking into that I would be a little concerned about, I'm going to use the word concern lightly. But it's the trench play of the Big Ten. Obviously, that's kind of been a staple of Big Ten play for a number of years now. And I would say Oregon has a lot of ambiguity going on in terms of like the defensive line in specific. That's going to be a position of key here. There's tons of talent there. It's just there's a lot of inexperience as well. Guys who have been around the program for a couple of years, but haven't necessarily been able to get on the field as much as we'd like to see heading into the first year. So, like I said, I'll use that word cautiously, but that's definitely the thing that I'm going to be thinking about heading into year one in the Big Ten.
Okay, so let's go ahead and break this down. Let's go ahead and do the quarterbacks first. Obviously, we'll go ahead and bring up the Oregon quarterbacks, what they are bringing in, what they have versus Ohio State.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we all know, it's been pretty big news in the offseason. Oregon was able to get a couple major quarterbacks in this year's portal haul between Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma and Dante Moore from UCLA, who Oregon fans are very familiar with. He was a late flip in the 23 cycle, ended up choosing to go to UCLA. Didn't work out there quite as the way he's wanted to, and ended up coming back to the place where we all thought it was going to start in the first place. But yeah, as we go through it, I said, in terms of the QB room, we're looking at a top two or QB room, right? So I think Ohio State is the other QB room that kind of rivals this one in terms of the talent in the room. But if we're just looking at the top two in specific, so the two guys that we would expect to see on the field at certain points this year between Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore, Dylan Gabriel has a chance to set the record for most starts. If he has a good enough year, there's a chance he, takes over the all-time passing yards lead. So it's like there's tons of experience at the QB1 position. And obviously Dante Moore, like you're not going to find many other backup QBs in all of college football that kind of have the potential and the experience that he already has. Obviously he was a very highly touted 5-star recruit in the 23 cycle. He was able to start right away in certain positions for UCLA last year. Comes to Oregon, says, hey, I'm cool with sitting behind Dylan Gabriel. We're going to learn the system. We're going to develop a little bit. But it's like the fact that we have somebody sitting in the backup role right now who, if Dylan Gabriel happens to go down for whatever reason, it's someone I would be fairly comfortable and confident in that he would be able to make an impact and kind of continue what we need to see to be successful in this league. So in the QB position, this is one where I'm fairly confident that, it's going to be a point of strength for Oregon this year, regardless of what happens on the injury front or anything kind of down that line.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Dylan missed maybe a game or two last year, but over his career has been kind of a guy that doesn't get nicked up too bad. But it is nice to know that Dante Moore had started for UCLA. Um, Obviously, great offensive mind there and previous head coach. So it's not like he's not gonna be able to pick stuff up. I think that I think that when you start a true freshman, I don't like it, but I don't know if anybody was better on that roster at the UCLA roster than what they had in Dante Moore. So with that being said, I think that I think Dante decided, hey, let's go to Oregon, let's sit, let's learn, let's not rush this thing, and I think him and Dylan are going to be, a great, kind of companionship for each other. Dylan's obviously it's his last year. He knows that the reins are going to have to be handed over to Dante, and then Dante, if you guys have a blowout, can come in and do cleanup work because that's just more game time experience, and I think that would be good for him. So what we have on Ohio State is kind of that same style of what you have at Oregon, right? You have an older guy in Will Howard, and then you have two very young guys, class of 2024, and Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan.
Yeah, and one thing I kind of talked about it with in terms of the QB room and looking at the comparisons, I think Oregon's a little more confident and ready to
Proven.
go in terms of like they're 1 and 2. The one thing that I really give Ohio State the edge in is they truly have 3 quarterbacks on their roster right now who could end up being very high draft picks at a certain point. So the Ohio State's 3 deep is almost unrivaled. I would argue they have one of the best QB rooms in all of the country, just because of how deep they are. But once again, there's kind of a lot of ambiguity there. Will Howard, very talented quarterback, but you don't always know what you're getting. And then obviously, it's really hard to look at a guy who hasn't seen the field like Julian Sayin or Aaron Nolan to say they are going to be the guy, just because we've seen so many high recruits in years previous that they have all the intangibles, all the skill sets, but it doesn't necessarily pan out on the field. So until we're able to see that, it's hard for me to say this is a hard, this is clearly the best room. But once again, I think these are easily the top 2 QB rooms in the Big Ten going into this year.
And I'll say this about Will Howard, Kansas State transfer, uh, a guy that was hit or miss a little bit, but uh, Howard has never thrown to the thoroughbreds that Ohio State has, and that wide receivers. He's never had running backs like what they have. So I think the wishy washiness will definitely cut way back with Howard this year, just because of the amount of talent that is on that roster. So let's go ahead and break down that wide receiver room, and let's go for the Ducks first, and what you're thinking is going to happen here.
Yeah, so to lead off the show, I talked about the sheer depth that, Oregon has going into this year and how it's a point of strength. And, just kind of taking a look at these top 5 guys in the wide receiver room heading into this year, that's very, very apparent. I know everybody in particular are very excited about Evan Stewart and what he brings to the table. He has elite speed. He's an elite deep ball threat for sure. If you're kind of looking at sheer numbers from Texas A&M, it didn't quite pan out the way that many people had thought it would. But that doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't have the tools or the skill set to come in and make an immediate impact right away. In my opinion, I think he will kind of be that wide receiver one. And that's not to take away anything from Tez Johnson. Last year he had over 1,000 yards, over 10 touchdowns. He was, obviously him and Troy Franklin were an easy 1-2, but he showed just how reliable he is. Doesn't drop a lot of passes. He's able to get free. He finds the open spaces. He moves extremely well once he has the ball in his hands. So it's like Oregon's top 2 is something I'm very confident in. It's when we get to that 3 and 4 with like Trayshawn Holden and Gary Bryant that there's a lot of people who aren't quite so sure what we're getting. Last year, we were able to see flashes from both of them. But in my opinion, I think this year in particular, Trayshawn Holden's going to be a guy who really takes the next step, makes a massive leap in that wide receiver room. I think he's going to have a massive part in this offense this year. And everything we've heard from practice between last year and earlier this year, put on some size. I think he's going to have a major role. And then Gary Bryant as well. He's a guy who didn't necessarily have eye-popping stats last year, but he just showed how reliable he is. He's not a guy who's going to be dropping balls left and right. Works very well in zone coverage, able to find the soft spot in the defense. And, as with all of these guys on the screen, he moves very well after the ball. And then personally, the one I'm almost most excited for is Jurion Dickey. Definitely one of the highest ranking receivers that Oregon has ever signed in their program's history. Last year dealt with a bit of a meniscus issue, wasn't able to see the field a whole lot, and for good reason. There was a lot of depth on that team last year, as is there this year. But I think this is the year where he's going to get his chance. Had a healthy end of the year, had a healthy offseason to this point. I know he's put on some more size heading into this 24 season. We just definitely still have a little ways to go here, but he's absolutely going to see the field too. Obviously a former 5-star. So that wide receiver room is another one where I'm incredibly confident in the depth they have. There's guys 1 through 5 where if they're on the field, I'm pretty confident that, Oregon's going to be able to put a good product on the field with these guys. So definitely a point of strength for the Ducks heading into 24.
Yeah, for sure. One of the top tier offensive wide receiver rooms in the Big Ten for sure. With 2 5 stars and 2 high ranked 4 stars, and then Tez Johnson is a 3 star is kind of wild for what he's put out and what he's done for the Ducks last year. And so it's one of those things where if you could get a guy healthy like Jerion, it just makes you that more explosive. Evan Stewart, you know what he is, but can he be the guy? Can he be a true number 1 wide receiver? When they put the best DB on him, belt buckle to belt buckle, is he going to be able to deal with that if they double coverage him? But with the slew of talent that you have across the board, I think that you guys are definitely one of the better Big Ten wide receiver rooms.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate here for Duck fans, and this is kind of why we put the trigger warning at the top of the show. Ohio State has,
It's
an
wide receiver
equally.
you right now.
It is, and I have no argument against it. I understand, they're going to be a rival to a point, but I'm not going to sit up here and lie to the people and say, the room is not talented. I would argue they are the most talented room heading into the 24 season in the Big Ten. Obviously, there's a lot to be seen with that, but just the sheer depth they have in the field. Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith was obviously the number 1 wide receiver in this year's class. That was big news. The Buckeyes were able to get him. Mylan Graham, another highly rated guy. He's one who he might be in the 2 deep this year just because he's not going to hit the campus for the Buckeyes until a little bit later this summer. But I do expect to see him at some point. He's a massively talented guy. And then Brandon Inniss, obviously, once again, extremely talented as well, as with, all the Buckeyes receivers that we've seen over the last how many years. Brian Hartline's a wide receiver group is always ready to go. I think that's going to be the case once again this year. I will say it's not necessarily a knock against the Ducks. It's just if your name's mentioned in the same conversation as a Buckeyes wide receiver room, you're doing something right. I don't think the gap's crazy big, but I would give a slight edge to the Buckeyes wide receiver room heading into this season.
Yeah, and also they signed this past class they signed Jeremiah Smith,
Right.
the number one wide receiver in the nation. They signed that's going to be a true freshman that was with that Mylan Graham class that they signed a couple other guys. I mean, the talent level there is unreal. It's not only the best wide receiver room in the Big Ten. It's probably, I would have to say, the best wide receiver room in the nation. Um, Auburn with the freeze four there, they really uptick, but those guys are all unproven. Some of these guys are already proven, and when you're bringing in, number one, number five, number seven, number nine wide receivers in their class, it's just stacking the talent. I mean, they're true thoroughbreds there, and like I said earlier with the quarterbacks, I think that Howard has never had wide receivers like this, so it's going to be very very interesting to see. If he can be the next great Ohio State quarterback, him being a transfer, and if they can make a run. And they've Ohio State's had a bunch of good quarterbacks. They've had a bunch of good wide receivers. I think defensively they have some questions. I think that they're not the best defense in the Big Ten, and I think that, like what we talked about earlier, I think Brian Hartline's, or not Brian Hartline, but Ryan Day's job is kind of in the hot seat, because you cannot continually lose to Michigan and not make the playoffs at Ohio State. It recruits itself. It is the mecca of the Midwest. It's supposed to be the top tier program in the Big Ten, and I think with Oregon coming in and it could sucker punch them. I think that if you lose to Michigan and Oregon this year, I think that could be some big problems.
100% agree, and I think that's also partially why this Ohio team state is particularly dangerous, right? Right? It's no secret. Ryan Day knows it. He understands what's on the line this year, and he's going to pull all the stops. We've seen it in the transfer portal this year. Ohio State's definitely tackled it in a different demeanor than they have in years previous. They made it very clear what they're trying to do this year, which is win the whole thing. They don't want to beat
Natty or
Michigan.
nothing. It's
Yeah,
natty or nothing.
it's not just Michigan. It's not just Oregon. It's not Penn State. We're going for a national championship. It's the goal, and they definitely have the roster to do so. It's an extremely talented roster. I think that October 12th matchup in Eugene, Ryan Day versus Dan Lanning, is going to be an absolute slugfest. So that's one I definitely look forward to. But this is a dangerous team. I know Duck fans don't want to hear it, and they're going to say, oh, we should win by X amount, which is fair. I love the confidence, and I think it's going to be a great game regardless of who comes out on top of that one. I'm just saying, you need to be well aware of what exactly you're going up against this year. And this is a Goliath. This is a monster team heading into the season.
Yeah, they can score at, the defense is not bad. It's not terrible. They're usually top 50, top 30, top 25. It's rare to have a terrible Ohio State defense. The defense is not, like what Florida's one was, like just terrible. This defense can still hold you. And then they have the firepower to go out and just get into a absolute shootout. And I think if I'm an Oregon Duck, I want to slow the game down as much as I can. But let's go ahead and get into the running backs, because they can also slow the game down.
Yeah, well, once again, not to be repetitive about myself, but once again, when I'm looking at comparing all these rosters across the Big Ten, so I know it's been an Oregon, Ohio State kind of showdown to this point. But truly, we're taking a look at the entire Big Ten, the entire landscape of what they bring to the table. And once again, Ohio State here might just have the edge in terms of their running back room. Travion Henderson, as we saw last year, was a wonderful back for the Buckeyes. He has potential to be a high draft pick next year. And then you go in, you hit the portal, and you bring in the number one running back in Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss. And, once again, all he did was run for over 1,000 yards. I think he was top 3 this year in yards per carry. So it's just like, absolutely no slouch. That 1-2 combination, once again, might just be the best 1-2 combination in terms of running back rooms in the country, not just the Big Ten. And then, Dalen Hayden, he's going to be their three. He's seen plenty of reps himself. I think it's going to be a three-headed monster for the Buckeyes. The top two with Henderson and Judkins, I think those guys are definitely going to pull the weight, but we will see Hayden this year as well. And he's, once again, a phenomenal athlete. And this is kind of why we talk about, how dangerous this Buckeyes offense is. And, not to take away from Oregon, this is an Oregon show. So absolutely, Jordan James ran for over 7 yards a carry last year. Noah Whittington was on pace to do the same before an injury. He's coming back. We're hearing that he's healthy and able to participate fully in all the drills and stuff in this off season currently. And then you bring in, a D2 guy, somebody not a lot of people are familiar with, and Jay Harris Jr. He was a D2 Heisman finalist. Forgive me, I forget the name of that award in specific, but it's their version of the Heisman. So he's coming in. He's going to be Oregon's biggest back physically heading into this year. So I absolutely think we're going to see plenty of him as well. And then obviously, Duck fans are pretty familiar with Jaden Lamar as well. He was a true freshman last year who was able to get some time. He kind of plays more of that third down back. So it's like, and once again, just taking a look at all these rosters across the Big Ten, it's Oregon and Ohio State, they're up here, and then the rest of the field seems to follow after that. So we have a very, very talented running back room across these two teams once again this year. And that's kind of what makes both these teams dangerous, right? So they're able to air this ball out, take it deep. We talked about the quarterbacks and the wide receivers; those guys are dangerous in themselves. But then when you're not able to just focus on these dynamics of the game, and all of a sudden you bring in running back rooms like this, and we'll get into the offensive line here, but both these offensive lines are very skilled as well. These are very, very dangerous teams, and definitely both teams that I expect to see in this playoff come December.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get a onslaught of running backs, why not Wisconsin? Wisconsin always has one good running back. They always have a bell cow, and
Mm-hmm.
Allen and previous years. I mean, you can go all the way back to Ron Dane, or they always have one bell cow back. Now, coaching changes, which means that recruiting running backs is going to be a little bit different. Um, I don't know. I don't know under the new regime if they're gonna recruit a running back like what Wisconsin used to do. I mean, those guys used to get 35, 40 touches a game. That when you say run a running back into the dirt, Wisconsin would dang near try to do it. I mean, they're gonna run you till the wheels fall off, and we saw that in Brean Allen this past year. He was kind of banged up a little bit, but going to the draft, they always do have one, but we're talking overall depth, and I
Sure.
think Ohio State. There's going to be a good Michigan running back. There's going to be a good Penn State running
Mm-hmm.
back. I get it. I get it. We're talking the whole room depth. I think Ohio State definitely has probably the deepest running back room out there in the Big Ten.
Yeah, fact. And I'm going to preface it one more time just because I think a lot of people are going to let these emotions get the best of them. There are very, very skilled running backs in the Big Ten. Like you said, Wisconsin, they've had plenty of them. I
I
grew
mean,
up in Wisconsin. Yeah,
they have a first rounder like every 2 years. It
right.
seems like.
The Monty Balls, the Melvin Gordons, Heisman winning Ron Danes, the Braylon Allen this year, what was it, a 17, 18-year-old phenom. Like the dude was an absolute animal. They will have a running back. This is not what I'm saying. Penn State has a very skilled running back room in terms of their top two. The Minnesota has a solid running back heading into this year. It's just when we're speaking about these rooms, we're speaking about the totality of it, the sheer depth of it. And I think that's kind of where Ohio State and Oregon are going to shine just a little bit brighter than some of these other programs, just because of, they have guys that are going 3-4 deep that have potential to see the field and make an impact.
Yeah, so I misquoted. I said he was going to the NFL. I don't think he is going to the NFL. He's a junior. But from Fond du Lac, um, heck of a lake there at Fond du Lac, and but they always seem to have one. They usually get them out of New York, for some reason, but or New Jersey area, New York area, but
Mm-hmm.
they always have one guy that is just absolutely a phenom, and but they don't have a deep room. They got the Clemson transfer a couple years ago. He's okay, and they have another guy, but not as deep as Ohio State. And before before everybody comes on here and beats us in the comment section. Um, we think that offensively, we'll do a defensive video, but we think offensively, Ohio State has the deepest rooms in the running back, the wide receiver, and the quarterbacks. I know you had something about the offensive line. Let's go ahead and get into that real fast, and see what you think there.
Yeah, so this is another one where, in my opinion, this is probably the toughest room for me to walk through all of these Big Ten programs and kind of project going into this year. One, for the sheer fact that the Big Ten typically has, very good offensive lines across the board. So I'm
Yep,
going to come on here and preface this by saying, when I say this, I'm not saying that there aren't other talented rooms out there. There absolutely are. And arguably, I'd say this is probably the most talented conference in all of college football in terms of what they bring across the board in the offensive line in this 24 season.
absolutely.
Um, how I rank this, I think Oregon has a chance to be the best offensive line in this year. And before people are jumping on, they're like, "Oh, bro, you're just being a homer." Da 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 da. Because once again, there are plenty of talented rooms. Michigan lost a little bit, but they will bring back a talented room. Wisconsin always has a talented room. Ohio State struggled a little bit in their offensive line last year, but they were able to bring in a couple pieces. And I expect their line to be better again this year. But people will quickly forget, Oregon last year was a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. I believe they gave up 5 sacks all of last year, which is, a phenomenal number considering some of the D lines that they were playing throughout the year. And, when we're heading into this 24 season, they were able to retain a lot of it. Josh Connerly, he'll probably be a day 1 pick come next year. Johnny Cornelius, another one who's kind of in that boat. He could be around 2 or 3 pick if he, plays to his projection this year. He was pretty big having come back. The only real losses from last year are Jackson Powers Johnson, who's going to be a first round to a second round center in this year's draft, and Stephen Jones at left guard. So, the left guard in one in particular is one where that can be a pretty tough one to fill. But they were able to do so by bringing in Matthew Bedford, the Indiana transfer, the one-time Colorado commit. He's going to come in. He was a former All Big Ten honorable mention player. He's one where its injuries have kind of riddled his career, but when he's on the field, whereas he's played over 1,300 snaps, allowed 2 sacks, and just 15 QB pressures in his entire career. So if he's healthy and he's on the field, he's going to be one who I'm fairly confident can play to the level of what Stephen Jones was last year, if not project above that. And then, losing Jackson Powers Johnson, the best center in all of college football last year, that's a tough blow. But all you're doing is you're replacing him with freshman All-American Pancho Lalolu. Excuse me, tough pronunciation on some of these, but he played in the Fiesta Bowl this year, and I know there were a lot of people that were kind of worried about that one. Played a flawless game. He showed exactly how quick on his feet he is. He's able to, make some of these blocks that are pretty impressive for, 3 and 4 year guys, and he's doing this as a true freshman who saw limited snaps this year. And I know the coaching staff heading into the season is especially excited about what he brings to the table. So I think, that's going to be a slight drop off in talent just because, first round centers are pretty rare. But if you're replacing it with someone of this quality, I don't think the drop off is going to be completely huge. So I think there's a chance that this Oregon offensive line could be good, if not better than last year, believe it or not. Just because, a lot of these guys, they were transfers last year, like the Johnny Cornelius. He was an FCS guy from Rhode Island. In year 1 with the Ducks, played great. Coming back for a year 2, I expect, year 2 to be even better. So before people jump down my throat in these comments, I think the Ducks have a chance to be the best offensive line. I'm not saying that for hard fact. It's just kind of how things project right now. They're the one I'm most confident in that we're going to see stability from 23 to 24.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's wrap this thing up. Let's rank our top 4 teams in the Big Ten as you see it. Just, I guess, overall.
Yeah. So in my ranking right now, obviously we're talking about the offense. This is what I see in terms of offensive rankings this year. We'll put out another video on the defense, but this is strictly offense. So keep that in mind. Number 1, I'm going to go with Ohio State. Obvious reasons, tons of depth at the skill positions. Like the rooms are unmatched, very, very deep, very talented. They play very well. Number 2, I'm going to put our Ducks. I think, once again, there's depth across the board. Their skill positions are through the roof. The QB room is something I'm extremely excited about. Offensive line should be right there on pace with last year, if not better. Three, I'll give it the nod to Penn State. I think they bring back a lot of talent. There's a lot of skill positions. Obviously, Drew Aller coming back is a big one. People are kind of wishy-washy on what he brings to the table, but in reality, I think you can admit he's a pretty consistent player overall. And then four, I would give it to Michigan. There's going to be a slight drop off there. There's a lot of moving pieces. Blake Corum's obviously gone, change at the QB position with JJ McCarthy heading to the draft this year. We don't really know who's going to be heading that QB room per se, but what we do know is they will put a great product on the field again this year. So that's kind of where I am. And then I would give it like honorable mentions. I think USC could be in the conversation. Once again, with their quarterback situation, they put out a great showing in their bowl game, but until we see that over and over again, I don't feel confident enough putting them in that spot. And then, the rest of the Big Ten, it's yet to be seen. So these rankings, obviously there's a lot of room for movement there, but this is kind of what we're looking at in the preseason.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna go Ohio State, Oregon. I'm gonna go Penn State, and then I'm gonna drop Michigan out because all of the movement and stuff like that, new head coach and everything. I'm really excited about what Luke Fickell's bringing to Wisconsin with that air raid attack. You know, Wisconsin has always been 4 yards in a cloud of dust power I team. I think that he brought in like four quarterbacks. He brought in like eight receivers through the transfer portal. He has totally revamped that entire Wisconsin offense. I'm super excited. Another year under his belt. I'm excited to see what that Wisconsin team does, and I think they're going to have another great defense this year. I think that they are going to not go full Iowa and just wear you down and put you to sleep. I think they're going to be able to go score some points. So I think Wisconsin's four for me. So
I love it. Like I said, growing up in Wisconsin for over 20 years, been to a lot of Badger games. If there's a team I keep under my sleeve a little bit, it's the Badgers. I have a bit of a soft spot for them. So I would love to see that be the case. And like I said, there's just a ton of moving parts for a lot of these Big Ten teams. So it's really hard to we're splitting hairs here when we're talking like 4, 5, 6. You can make an argument for a couple teams in this position, but yeah, I'm with you. I could see the Badgers, bringing back a high level offense. I think in year 2, they're going to take a bit of a leap in the Luke Fickell offense. Last year they're a little bit stagnant from times. But now that we got a bit of continuity, got a whole nother offseason, I think there's a chance that they take that step and could be, push themselves into that conversation.
for sure, for sure. So we'll go ahead and the next video coming out will probably be the defensive video. Super excited about that. But I just wanted to wrap things up. This is Cody, the professor, and Derek the Duck, and we will see you later.